Okay, so it's at the top of the hour, and we want to be very respectful of your time, so we're going to go ahead, be prompt, and get started. I'm going to hand it off to Myron Braun, VP of Sales at Renotis.
Great. Thank you very much, Colleen. I appreciate you organizing the webinar, and I want to, first of all, extend my thanks to, of course, Joe Spinka for joining us today in the midst of what is a typically busy day for a CIO. So thank you, Joe. Most importantly, I want to thank, of course, all the folks that are joining the webinar. Some are joining a little bit late here, so that's fine. We'll kick this thing off and get started, and as you said, respect everyone's time. I really do want to thank you all because I know how busy your days are and how valuable your time is. And to take that time out, we want to make sure that you have value to today's message and you find it very informative as each of you move forward, of course, with your careers and your companies. First, a little bit about the agenda itself. What we're going to do, of course, is have the welcome and intro, which we just did. Joe Spinka then is naturally going to come on and share, certainly the results of his partnership with Renotis and how we solved telecom and mobility problems. But really, to put that into context, Joe is going to begin with an overview that he does that describes the trends in IT transformation and what it really means to IT organizations and how they can be best positioned for the future. And then part of that, of course, is describing how great partnerships, ecosystem partnerships, can enable those kinds of results as well. And certainly that's where he's going to talk about the results with Renotis and solving these problems and frustrations in telecom and mobility. I will then come on and give a brief overview of Renotis, and we'll certainly then move to a Q&A. So that's the agenda for today. I know there's still some folks joining, so I think we'll just get started right away with the agenda. For those of you that don't know Joe, I wanted to begin by ultimately, when I hand this off to him, give you guys a little context into Joe's background. He's truly acknowledged, I think, as perhaps one of the best friends of the IT profession. And that's, easy for me to say because he's really selfless, I think, in sharing his wisdom and advice to folks in this profession. And he, I think that's been proven by the fact that he's a 2-time CIO of the Year award winner. And that can't, that'd be difficult in and of itself. But when you consider that he was voted by his peers to that honor, both in Charlotte and Minneapolis, two distinctively different places, I think it really speaks to the authenticity of Joe as a leader and that he cares deeply about the profession and seeing it move forward. And the ultimate way to show that is manifested by him writing a book, of course, putting his decades of experience and wisdom down on paper and actually developing a field guide, if you will, for what he's passionate about, which is this concept of developing an IT business partnership role within IT that allows it to converge with the business. And I'll let him talk about that. Ultimately, the reason that's so important is it then enables, external partnerships like those with Renotis to really take some of that tactical stuff off the plate and really help IT accelerate its results within the business, which is ultimately the final goal and objective. So with that, for those of you that don't know about Joe's book, as I hand it off to Joe, just a quick synopsis. It's called IT Business Partnership. I'm sure he would not be upset if you decided to purchase that on Amazon if you don't own it. Great book. It really is, and it really speaks, I think, to this concept of this role within IT that really enables it to become converged with the business, as I said, and legitimizes the role and the importance of changing the language of IT instead of being aligned with the business, really being converged, and ultimately focusing on the end customer. That's, of course, where IT can add the greatest value. So with all of this, I'm going to turn this over to Joe, but again, it's the all-important beginning of this webinar is for Joe to begin by describing the speed of these trends that are taking place right now in the world and what it means to IT as a profession and this role, and then how that connects to great partnerships with companies like Renotis that ultimately solve frustrations and problems to enable IT to focus on the strategic initiatives and really advance the business. Kind of that 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. So with that, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Myron, and thank you, Colleen. Can you all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Yep.
Great, yeah. Sorry, scrambling day, as you said, Myron. Nothing like a production crisis to get your heart rate going during the day. Well, I would like to just spend a little bit of time talking about the marketplace that we all live in. And one of the things I like to do to sort of ground the conversation is to talk about what I characterize as the dizzying pace of change. And technology has played such an important role in every aspect of almost every business on the planet. And if you think about, how technology has influenced the way that businesses go to market, you don't have to look too far to see how big an influence that mobile and internet have had on the global population. More than half are mobile users, and a bunch of those are internet users, and more are now active on social media and on mobile. And so that phenomenon has had a profound effect in the way companies go to market. And, if you look at social media in particular, those numbers are astronomical. If you compare that to, say, 10 years ago, roughly when I think Facebook and LinkedIn both came on the scene, their numbers have grown faster and more quickly than anyone could have imagined. And so you see Facebook at 1.65 billion accounts. It boggles the mind in terms of the number of accounts. However, Facebook says there are 82 million fake profiles, and it's hard for me to understand exactly how they quantify a fake profile, but nonetheless, they're there. And, YouTube, 300 hours of video every hour, and 3.5 billion likes on Instagram. So the world we live in has changed. And 10 years ago, before the iPhone arrived on the scene, that was about 10 years ago, as of July of last year, it would be hard to imagine a world where it is so dominated by social media and technology and mobile. Those things really, as I said, have had a profound effect on business. And so when you think about technology adoption, you hear technology experts and industry analysts talk about the adoption curve and how it has changed dramatically over the years. And I found this interesting set of numbers here that sort of illustrate how quickly things are changing. And so this graph shows some technologies that are, familiar to all of us, but what they've measured is the number of years it took to get a quarter of the American population to adopt the technology. So when you look at electricity, it took 46 years for a quarter of the American population to have electricity in their homes. And you can start to see how that adoption curve increases, 35 years for 25% on the telephone, and then zoom forward to, the technologies that we're all familiar with today. And you can see that PCs only took 16 years, and you zoom ahead to the web, and that, took only 7 years to have 25% of the population adopt that technology. So it's a real statement when you think about how quickly technology is impacting all of our lives and almost every aspect of it. It shows how much we have to think about how we go to market in our companies and how we have to adapt to mobile and social as we think about our products and services and customers in terms of how they engage with the companies that we work for. So moving ahead, I mentioned the iPhone. It took just 10 years for Apple to get to 1 billion devices sold. It's, I think, the fastest any consumer product has reached that number in such a short period of time. So that was a monumental milestone back in July. If those of you on the webinar remember that. And so you think about how technology has impacted the political landscape. We're not that far off from the previous election, but in my lifetime, I would never have imagined a world where email and Twitter and cyber espionage would play such a major role in an election. And it still is. It's borne out every day. We see, lots of, conversation around the election. Was it rigged? Was it not rigged? And all of it seems to center around cyber espionage and email and Twitter. So even in that aspect of our lives, technology has had a major impact. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm pro or con, Hillary or President Trump, but it all had a role to play. And it's still unfolding as we speak. And so when you think about, some companies, here's a quiz that I like to give people. I call this the digital disruption reality. Here are 6 companies, and if you take a look at these guys, taxi companies and the accommodation provider, telephone company, et cetera, just think of these guys in terms of not having any infrastructure. So the taxi company, for instance, doesn't have taxis. The largest retailer doesn't have any inventory, and the largest movie house has no cinemas. And I'm sure you're all guessing who these guys are, and I'll give you the answers now because I know you're in great suspense here. Probably not too many surprises. Maybe Alibaba is the only one that would be a surprise. They actually ship 10x or 50x more products than Amazon, although Amazon's market cap is significantly bigger. But this is a world we live in. These guys, most of them were not around 10 years ago, and now they lead their industries and their markets, and they're largely there directly as a result of mobile technologies, people buying product, people ordering cars, people watching Netflix, all through technology-based solutions. So this is a very real way to look at the implications of technology on these industries. And so when I stop and think about it, I can't help but think about the implications to us as IT professionals. And I like to think about transforming IT from 3 vantage points. And generally when industry analysts talk about transforming IT, oftentimes they point their energy and their focus directly at the head of IT, the CIO, and they don't think about the rest of the organization. And so it's as if, IT has to change kind of in a vacuum. And so when I talk about transformation, I think of it in these 3 flavors. The first of which is, first, you as an IT leader have to think differently about how IT brings value to an organization. We have to start acting like business people. And once you do, you'll be surprised by the reaction you get from within companies. And I'll give you some ideas on how you can do that. And the second thing you have to do as an IT leader is convince your own teams that they're really a business unit. That's the biggest nut to crack for me that I've seen throughout my almost 40 years in IT. It's your own IT organizations that sort of hold you back. They're anchored in the past in some respects. And so you've got to convince them that they are a legitimate business unit and they have just as much weight as a business unit as any other group within the company. And then thirdly, you've got to convince the C-suite to think differently about IT. You have to convince them that IT is not just a cost to be considered, but also, the projects you take on in IT are real investments. They actually can lift the performance of the company. And so as you do that, this transformation can happen, but it can't happen unless you get all 3 of these components working in concert with one another. And so one of the ways you can do that, if you think about transforming your organization, is you have to start thinking about IT differently. When you think of a business, oftentimes, we settle in on marketing, sales, finance, HR, and operations as core to the business. We think of those individual business units collectively as the business. And we use this phraseology about, aligning IT to the business. And that's something that just makes me crazy. And I've convinced the teams that I work for that we need to stop talking about alignment and we have to move beyond it, because if you're aligned, that means you're not part of the business, and it means that, when the company goes off to do strategy, and IT is not a part of that conversation, you end up having to align to the business, quote unquote. And so we have to start thinking about getting converged and becoming part of the business. And so, the whole notion of let's align to the business is sort of a passé, old school way of thinking of IT. And I would suggest to you today that IT is a legitimate business unit. It is on par with every other business unit within the company. And that's largely due to the social media, internet technologies, cloud-based solutions that we're all dealing with today in the marketplace. And so a way to think about this is to embrace the power of business partnerships. It's to think differently about how you leverage your IT capabilities within an organization. And one of the ways I like to think about it is I like to think about strong ecosystem partners or vendor partners, because there's a bunch of stuff that we do as IT professionals that are non-differentiating, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And it's best, I think, to find partners out in the ecosystem that can actually help us do those sort of routine and mundane things that don't differentiate us in the marketplace. And then the second big partnership focus area that I spend time implementing and nurturing within the companies that I manage are IT business partnerships. It's a role that I wrote about and that I feel very passionate about. And as I look at my own career, when I've had success, the most success has been when I've done these 2 things very, very well. And what's interesting about that is we had some interesting research that was done by Deloitte back in November. They wrote a white paper called Charting the Course for Business Value, and there were 2 interesting sets of data that I really want to highlight today. When they talked to CIOs, basically they said that they ranked ecosystem partners as the least important IT capability within their organizations. But what's interesting, the flip side of that is that what Deloitte called change instigators. They said that these folks felt differently about that. They placed a higher value on ecosystem partners, and they actually delivered better value than their peer group competitors, because they know that finding an ecosystem partner to do those sort of routine things is a lot better value proposition than putting your own precious resources on those sorts of things. And then most CIOs said, "Oh, by the way, strategic partnerships are critical in terms of having success within organizations," but only 5% said they did that very well. And so these two things work in concert. And I think if you find strong ecosystem partners and you have if you implement a strong business partnership program, your results are going to be much more significant and better than your peer groups. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that now, actually. So I talked about this a moment ago, but when I look at IT, I kind of like to break it into three segments. At the very bottom in that red segment is what I characterize as the dial tone layer. Those are things like email and phone systems and networks and all of those sorts of things, which are crucial to the operations of the business. In fact, a good portion of my day was consumed by a network outage that caused our call center to basically be non-operational. So that when that ecosystem partner doesn't perform, we get a black eye. So you've got to find the right partners, and Renotis was not that partner, by the way. We are working with Renotis on helping us out in that front. But you really want to find that strong partner who can take that on your behalf, because at the end of the day, customers don't come to your company because of your great dial tone or your great email services. And so I like to focus the energy and the passion of the business partner program on the business operations layer. So I like to think about helping the supply chain or sales organization with their annual strategic goals, because if I can do that, they'll look at IT differently. They'll see us as a valued partner, a strategic partner. And then once you gain your stripes there, you can move to the external customer layer, where your IT business partners spend time in the field with actual customers, where they see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears the pain points and problems that your customers have. And when all that happens, I call that moving from IT leader to business technology leader, a BT leader. And the research shows that when you do this, you have a 4x opportunity to improve results. And so that research was done by a couple different organizations. Deloitte has done some research on that front. PwC has done some research. And then the Business Technology Institute has done research. And they've looked at companies that have strong business partner programs where IT and the business are intertwined. And those companies are oftentimes producing 4x the results than their peer group. So there's a business case to be made to move from IT leader to business technology leader, as I describe it here today. And so what is a business partner? What do they do? There are three core skills that they need to have, sort of strengths. The first of which is a dot connector strength. These folks are able to see, with this strength, events and circumstances that other people don't see. They look beyond. They're able to, sort of connect the dots organizationally. They're looking at problems in the marketplace, and they're able to take that back to problem areas and then ultimately solutions that overcome those problem areas. So those are dot connectors. And I think of one very famous dot connector that we all know, and that was Steve Jobs when he married the music industry to iTunes and the iPod. That was game changing. Wasn't the first MP3 player in the market, but he connected those dots in a way that no one else did, and then the rest is history. So in futuristics, the next major skill that a business partner has to have, you have to have someone who's willing to ask those what-if questions. These are folks that aren't necessarily tied to a particular system that they're an expert in. These are people that are more than willing to ask, what if we did this differently, and look beyond the constraints of the systems they may have actually built themselves. And those what if questions become very important in terms of shaping the future. And then thirdly, these folks are relators. These are people that enjoy working, with other business units within the company and enjoy working with external customers, not the traditional IT stereotype that lives in the basement where food and water is, delivered through some hatch in the floor. So those are the three major strengths or skill areas that I look for in these business partners. And in my book, I talk about 5 others, but these are the 3 core that I always look for. And when you find people who have these skills, it makes the job of implementing this role a significantly easier path forward. So I know you're all asking yourself, what do these business partners do? And I'll simplify it to a large degree here. There's a lot more to it, but in essence, a business partner has to know the company's strategy. And as you can imagine, if you're going to help a company move forward, if you don't know the company's strategy, your odds of helping the company get to where it wants to go are a lot lower. And then these folks ultimately spend time in the field with actual real customers. And when they do, magic happens. They're able to see, kind of where the company wants to go. They're able to see how customers engage with the company, and from those experiences, they can identify investment roadmaps that really make sense. And so as I think about that role, those are the 3 sort of major areas. So get involved in the strategy up front, not after the fact. These are integrated and converged IT professionals. They're not having to align to the strategy. They're proactively involved, and they get immersed in the external customers' environments, and they enjoy, the clean truth of the reality that customers experience with your company in terms of how you deliver your products and services. And then they implement shared accountability. This is one of those tools that I've used over the past. When you get a project investment approved, what I like to do is make sure if I'm doing something, say, for the sales organization, I like to make the project success something that they put in their incentive plans for the year. And I like to put the success of the project, if it's going to lift revenue for the company, I like to put that success in the IT organization's plan. So there's a reciprocal or mutual or shared accountability between the organizations. It's a very powerful tool. So that's the key. Those are the key things that a business partner does. And so when you get there, this is what I call converged IT and business. When these business partners are integrated and intertwined, they think together, they act together, and they achieve together. The companies do. And so when you think together, the strategy is intertwined. There's no need to align anymore. You're a part of that conversation. And then when you act together, that means that, as investment concepts and ideas come up throughout the year, which they do, that there's a process in place to vet those ideas. It's not a reliance. Typically what IT faces is a last loudest voice scenario where some influential executive has their will with a portfolio of projects that you may want to undertake, and they forget the vetting process and the evaluation of the cost versus return on the investment. So having a group that's committed to acting together is very important. And as I talked about earlier, they achieve better results. And I said earlier that it's 4x results versus peer group competitors. And I think that's the key crux of any successful business partner program is you get real business results that can be measured. And what's interesting about converged organizations that the executive team understands the consequences of not acting and thinking and achieving together. They're more likely to invest in technologies like cloud computing and social media and other technologies in order to advance the needle on strategy. And the research shows that these companies are more on time and more on budget with the investments that they make. So that's a quick summary of what I characterize as a converged IT and business organization, and that's all led by the business partner program that I wrote about. And so I'm going to shift gears now and talk about that dial tone layer for just a moment. When I was at a very large retailer, it happened to be Red Wing, in Red Wing shoes, we were faced with some interesting business challenges. We were growing rapidly. We had some challenges with employee productivity, especially as it relates to mobile. We were being asked to do more with our limited resources, and we were challenged by not really having a disaster recovery program of any kind in our organization. So those were sort of the big challenges I was faced with back when I was CIO there. And then from an operating perspective, when you look at telecom management, we were sort of in our infancy. We didn't have, a real vendor. We had no contracts in place. We didn't have invoiced or change management processes in place, nor did we have the expertise to do it. We found that our costs were 20 to 30% higher than any businesses in the area, just because we'd really never focused on it. We didn't have great support from carriers. We didn't have policies in place. It was sort of a, willy-nilly sort of environment. Nor did we have the expertise to really address these problems. So that's just a quick backdrop on the challenges that we faced. And next, let me focus on some of the problems that I thought about as I was trying to solve for the telecom challenges that we were faced, and in light of the strategic growth and so forth that we were working on. As I mentioned earlier, managing telecom is somewhat at that dial tone layer, so that the focus on it, if I put my own resources on it, would be a drag on internal talent. I may not get an ROI out of that. And I know that there are people out there that have more expertise in managing these sorts of things than we did. And so that was the challenge. And so my choices were, do I hire my own people where I am not likely to get an ROI, and it's tough to staff that sort of function, or do I find the right partner? And in thinking through that context, I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to look for a partner, what are the dimensions of that partner do I want to look at? And I thought about managing the financials and the assets in our ecosystem, managing the technology and the vendor management aspects of it, and the support. Can somebody bring those 5 dimensions to the table? And as I looked at partners, I truly didn't expect that I would find anybody in the marketplace that could cover on all 5 of those areas. And what's nice about the Renotis platform is you can pick any one or all of these 5 dimensions, and they're more than willing to help you. Even if it's not a one-size-fits-all, you can pick and choose what you want. So I happened to hit the mother lode, and I really looked at a partner that could handle all 5 of those dimensions for us. And I also when I was trying to vet partners, I thought about what characteristics might I look for, and these 3 attributes that you see here: innovation and automation, client focus, proven results, and long-term partnership, were the 3 tenets of Red Wing Shoes. Those are the 3 same things that our organization looked for. I just got a note from Windows that says I have to do an update right now, so let me see if I can make sure that doesn't actually happen. That would be funny. And so, interestingly enough, when I looked at the Renotis platform, they checked off all those boxes. Their innovation, we looked at a whole bunch of different players out there, and no one had made an investment in the automation aspects of their platform to the likes of which that Renotis did. And they were very client-focused. I felt very comfortable with the management team. I felt very comfortable with the team that actually took over our support. I really felt as though they were part of our team. And I think that partnership still stands today, even after I've been gone now almost 3 years. So those are the 3 things I look for. And so you're asking yourself, hey, Joe, how did that all work out for you? Well, let me tell you. The economic benefits were pretty remarkable. We saw a 27% reduction in direct costs. We had a partner that kept us on track so that we weren't sort of getting beyond our skis in terms of scope, and they were actually able to proactively manage our cost environment and actually drive down costs. So those were some very real benefits that were very tangibly measured with Red Wing. And then, from a technical benefits perspective, they helped us architect a roadmap for technology. And in doing so, they actually gave us more bandwidth at a 33% less cost. And they also helped us drive down our monitoring costs by 50%. And they gave us an MDM platform, which we hadn't had in the past. So pretty compelling results. In addition, their support was better than our own help desk. I actually got more compliments from about the Renotis team within my organization than I got from my own help desk. And they were able to help us with some unique challenges. I had a head of HR who was going to make a trip to the Far East, and she was at a baseball game, a Twins game, and she literally dropped her phone in let's just call it a reservoir of water in a restroom. I think you can draw your own conclusions as to where that might have been. But leaving the next morning, she was fairly panicked about what to do about that. And the folks from Renotis jumped in and actually provided her a backup device, which was not part of our program. They just reached out asked her to come by the office. We happened to be not too far away, and they got her back up and running, and off she went. Finished her trip in Japan, and was very gracious and glad to have had the help that she did. And then from a business value perspective, it allowed us to focus on the more strategic initiatives that we're mounting as we were looking to grow from a market perspective. It helped us reduce business risk because we had a disaster recovery plan in place, and it made us more productive. So those 4 quadrants really summarize and highlight the value, the very real value that we got from the Renotice platform. So when I talk about ecosystem partners and finding somebody who can deliver the goods, this is what I'm telling you, is that Renotice did that for me at Red Wing, and I was very happy with that relationship, and they still enjoy it today. And so when I stop and think about business partnerships and the pace of change, I think the key to remember is that the pace of change is real. You hear about it all the time, and I have to stop and remind myself that it's real, because sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't sort of remember that it's a crazy world that we live in, and it has had and will continue to have a profound impact on the companies we work for. And I think if you want to do some transformation within your organization, you have to start thinking about your own trifecta, and it starts with language. Stop calling internal departments your customers, for example. I didn't talk about that today, but I don't refer to internal departments as customers. I call them peers or colleagues. And stop talking about alignment. Talk about convergence and getting proactively involved in strategy. And then begin to partner in the ways that I talked about. Implement that business partner program, and you will see results improve. You'll see perceptions about IT improve. Life will just get better, and you'll change that trajectory of your career just like I did. And then, leverage ecosystem partners for focus so that you can focus on the strategically important things, and let that ecosystem partner handle those dial tone components that I talked about earlier. So that's a quick tour through my experiences with Renotice and the Business Partner Program, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I am going to turn it right back over to Myron for some closing remarks.
Great. Thank you, Joe, very much. I appreciate that. I know you've had a hectic day going. And I also want to thank everybody participating in the webinar. We've got just a few minutes left to kind of give you an overview a little more tactically now about how Renotice really, kind of our philosophy and our methodology of how we think about helping clients, really solve the problems that Joe articulated actually quite expansively, that existed at Red Wing. But we realize everyone's in a different place, right, on their journey when it comes to telecom and mobility. They may not all have, an end-to-end set of issues or problems that need solving. And so when we think of it that way, we realize you might have an immediate pain point, and we want to be helpful with that. Or you may, as in Joe's case, look at it on an end-to-end basis. And even though you might do pieces well, collectively, when you look at an integrated approach to managing it, you may say, hey, that makes the most sense. Either way, we're here to help. That's the bottom line. Our clients are number one. It's not about us. It's about them. And so when we think about that, we think of it in 4 different ways to have a discussion with them about their environment. And, any initial meeting we might have with anybody on this call or any prospect or any client that we have today, it all begins with exploring what your pain and frustration is and your gaps. And again, we divide it into 4 major theaters, if you will, when we look at telecom and mobile. Obviously, the wireline theater speaks for itself, right? It's the wide area networking, and there we try to deliver, technical, economic, and service benefits, as Joe said, when we look at your data strategy and your voice strategy and your UC strategy. Next, we look at your mobile world, right? And there we have discussions with you around what kinds of pain points you might be suffering, because that's a very big value stream of things to deal with, right? From economic plan management to device management to end user support, MDM, on and on and on, right? But because these environments aren't static, there's always change going on in all of our clients and all of our prospects. As Joe obviously referenced, change is fast, and that certainly impacts, both telecom and mobility. We have a very mature practice, a telecom project management practice that ultimately services clients, that do our full turnkey approach or use us as in perhaps just a surgical approach where they might have a big project coming up. Maybe it's a field automation project. Maybe it's a network migration. Maybe it's an SD-WAN project. Certainly we have world-class folks helping there, and we want to talk about what gaps you might have in the expertise and ability to execute projects and not have the fear and the will to make those changes if needed. And, of course, the biggest change of all that's facing this industry, telecom in particular, of course, is software-defined wide area networking naturally, right? I mean, that is ultimately the big disruptor that virtually every one of our clients and prospects is not saying, if they will make that migration. It's a function of when and how, because it has so many benefits, right? Economic, resiliency, bandwidth, all the cloud application strategies that everyone has needs to have a wide area networking solution that's going to be durable, reliable, and resilient. And so for all those reasons, everybody's talking about how do we get to a software-defined wide area network environment at some point in the future. And we have a whole methodology and process to go around taking it from a current state to potentially a future state in the coming months, years, or however long it takes. And so we look at these 4 areas, and then we go into a little bit deeper dive, right? And we try to talk to our clients and prospects about what common challenges they're facing in being able to optimize their environments in each of these 4 areas. Again, in Joe's case and Red Wing's case and many of our other clients, it is truly the entire environment. They see the value of saying take it all away. But we do like to, of course, recognize not everyone's in that situation, and let's look at a more surgical approach. And this is how we do that. We look at your wireline environment. Do you have any gaps in time and talent to evaluate all these technology options? Is your IT staff distracted by network issues and escalations? Our resources, do you have the resources to manage and migrate to new technologies? A lot of companies choose not to migrate to a new, better technology simply because of the fear of doing so, right? The pain, the suffering, the ability, the expertise. Meanwhile, they're delaying the benefits associated with doing that, right? And so all those kinds of things we talk about and try to determine, where gaps might exist in our prospect base, and deliver, of course. The other part there is professional expense management. A lot of people on this call may already have telecom expense management firms assisting. Because doing that in your own AP department mixed with your IT department is very difficult to achieve, the kind of cost efficiencies you need to. And, of course, tied in with that is the deep expertise in knowing what best-in-class pricing looks like, contract terms, kind of the vendor management component that Joe referenced. All of that is where, sometimes companies have gaps in that area because they just don't have time to focus on that day in and day out. And so at the end of the day, it's really about the resources to manage your environment, the moves, adds, changes, and all that. So those are just some of the things we think of in the wireline environment. Mobile has its own unique things. Moving swiftly so we can get to some questions, we're happy to chat with anyone on this call about this particular roadmap of identifying where you might have issues. In mobile, it certainly oftentimes goes to the idea of even something as simple as inventory. Do you have a real-time inventory of all of your assets, your iPads, your mobile devices, and then managing that inventory? And then doing an ROI analysis on policies and practices. Is it BYOD? Should it be corporate liable? What are the pros and cons? What are the policy implications associated with each of those? At the end of the day, it's about employee productivity and value, and of course, reducing total costs. So we look at how do we help you assess and analyze all of that. And then, of course, the security is a key component of that, which naturally leads to decisions around MDM and EMM. And, of course, it's all about money, right, as well. And therefore, having the capabilities to do proper mobile plan management is really important because, as the next bubble indicates, the carriers, of course, are constantly in the midst of gymnastics of changing their pricing plans and how they do that because of, obviously, the competition in that space. And as Joe indicated, probably the best testament to all of this is at the end of the day, you have mobile environments because you want your employees productive to accelerate their customer outcomes, whether it's selling or servicing or whatever. And that means having great end-user support for them. And certainly, our help desk procedures and processes tied into all of this is critical to the whole equation. And maybe that's an area that obviously is a gap and a challenge for our clients. We talked about telecom program management or project management. Rifling through these in a relatively quick pace, it's pretty easy to discern if you have a gap here, right? Do you have the talent to manage complex and mobile projects? Do you have the custom tools that can go to that? Every IT department has a PMO and has individuals to do these things. The question becomes, with the infrequency of doing it in telecom spaces, do you feel comfortable making those changes, and do you have the seasoned experience? And again, no one wants to be afraid of new technologies in terms of migration if the issue there is only around professional project management to do so. And as I mentioned, there might be field mobility deployment projects and all that fun stuff that goes with it, right? And last, but certainly not least, is the whole idea of SD-WAN evaluation. It isn't, we view this as really a critical component for our current clients and all of our prospects because really where we will add value, right? It's really where we're going to step back and say, let's help you, first of all, evaluate the technology itself. Is it right for your environment? Is it not? Once that's determined, then you got to evaluate the right SD-WAN solution. For those of you, on this call that are technical in nature, certainly everyone knows that there's a spectrum from premise-based solutions like Cisco IWAN all the way to pure-play providers like VeloCloud, and really looking at your environment, what makes the most sense, and how to get that done. And part and parcel with that goes with doing an ROI and a business case, of course, once that's determined. And then naturally you want to do a proof of concept, right? Assess your environment, do a proof of concept, make sure it works. And then we have the deployment expertise to ultimately get it implemented. And of course, it's all about the ongoing management of the environment to ensure that you got all the benefits that were identified in the business case and needed in your environment, right? So that's a huge area. So that's I did kind of a quick flyover around each of the four major areas that make up the telecom and mobile environments for our clients and all clients. And all wrapped together, we call it turnkey telecom management. However, individually, as Joe said, we can help in any individual area where there might be a pain point today. And so it goes back to what we're all about in the last couple of slides here. We're all about our vision, which is to free clients from telecom and mobile frustrations. I mean, ultimately, as Joe described, that's foundational in the sense that then it allows you to focus on business partnership model in IT and ultimately the strategic part of it. And we do that vision by ultimately optimizing the telecom and mobile environment through innovative process, purpose-built systems, very talented people, and of course we've got to have really deep industry relationships to be able to affect the outcomes that ultimately you saw manifested at Red Wing by Joe. And to have you feel more comfortable about Renotis as a partner, even though Joe listed the characteristics that Red Wing evaluated, I'd like you to know what our reputation is, right? We started 15 years ago now, obviously as an agency business with services where we wanted to have deep understanding and experience about what the right technologies and carriers might be. It was a transactional focus, but it offered value in terms of support. Our clients then said, certainly as technology matured and developed, they needed help and support with mobility, expense management, and consulting. We offered a lot of value there, gained a lot of new clients, but it was segregated. And last but not least, for the last several years, we've been focused on this concept of truly a cultural transformation for us that's client-focused, not carrier-focused, complete solution offerings, of course, really making an end-to-end multidisciplinary approach, as Joe described. And at the end of the day, we need to leverage technology. We have our own platform, Microsoft Dynamics CRM, that we've configured and actually have a press release from Microsoft for innovatively developing the platform to be able to manage end-to-end all these tasks and activities for the technologies we've chatted about. So we really pride ourselves on continuously improving our environment to meet the needs of our clients, right? And so having done all this for 15 years, we have hundreds of enterprise clients. We've saved thousands of hours in IT, tens of thousands of mobile devices, lots of projects, of course, tens of millions in savings, lots of assets involved, lots of costs reduced, contract managed, vendors. These are just some stats around the fact it's not our first rodeo, and we take a lot of pride in being able to deliver this kind of value to our client base. But it's not about what we think or do. It's really about what our clients say about us. We're very pleased to be able to say we have a very high Net Promoter Score. We're in the midst of doing constant employee or client surveys right now and really assessing where we need to continuously improve and are very emboldened by the support we're getting from our client base. So we're pretty excited because that client base is ultimately what enables us to be able to offer this kind of value to our future clients, hopefully some on this call. Our current client base, obviously, we're proud to be able to, all the statistics I just covered come from clients such as this and many more. Our process is relatively simple. In a managed services environment, as you might expect, it begins with an assessment of your current state in any of the areas we talked about or all of the areas. We architect what the right future state solution might look like in terms of optimizing it. And then, of course, we ultimately end up presenting an ROI, a business case, and we onboard the client for whatever that might be. If it's as simple and surgical as financial management, say, for your wireline services, or as complex as everything, we onboard you, we burn in, and then we manage the environment on a daily, monthly, and annual basis, with ongoing support, ongoing advisory services, and, of course, service reviews to hold us accountable on how we delivered ultimately the results, for example, that Joe shared with you already. So that's the wrap. We wanted to be very respectful of the time and finish certainly within 45 minutes of the content so that we had some time available for Q&A. Hopefully everyone on this call found this a benefit and a value. Thank you, Joe, for sharing again your IT passion and wisdom about the trends, where it's going, what it means to IT organizations, and how an ecosystem vendor partnership like ours can really enable and help that. and certainly we're excited to be able to engage in conversations on any of the pain points in any of the areas we talked about today. So with that, Colleen, I'll turn it over and see if we've got any questions that folks would like to ask.
Sure thing. Well, thanks, Myron, and thanks, Joe. Yep, we do have a couple questions that came in. The first one is for Joe. It says, Joe, loved your analysis of trends and impacts on IT, as well as sharing all the benefits of working with Renotis. Did you get any concerns internally from the folks in your organization who owned that work before Renotis? And if so, how did you handle that so they did not feel threatened?
Oh, great question. Actually, we didn't get any pushback. These were people that felt overworked and ignored, and so us finding reinforcements in Renotis actually made that problem a lot better, and they actually felt like we were listening and responding to the concerns they'd been raising for some time. So I didn't have that particular challenge to deal with.
Great. Okay. So we've got a time for a couple more questions here. If you have a question on the line, feel free to submit it through the Q&A. We'll cover what we have time for, and what we don't have time for, we'll definitely get back to you after the webinar. All right, we've got another question. This one is for Myron. How much time is needed for the client, from the client side, to help you do an assessment that leads to recommendations, a business case or proposal, and can that be fast-tracked?
Yeah, no, good question. Comes up frequently, and I don't like avoiding it by saying it depends, but the honest answer is it really does. If the pain point that the client wants us to address is relatively surgical and small, candidly, we can fast-track the assessment of the environment and produce a proposal and give them some risk mitigation potential guarantees to make sure they're comfortable with it. We can do it in as little as a handful of business days. Obviously, if it's a comprehensive review of everything, as it was in Red Wing's case, we want to measure twice and cut once by doing a good job of assessing all areas of optimization potential so that a strong business case can be done and a strong ROI can be realized. And in that case, it could take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the environment. But we've developed a way to accelerate that, do most of the heavy lifting on our side, but we do require a commitment from the client to assist us naturally in gathering the data because it's a quality in, quality out type of an experience. So, yep, varies a lot. It could be a few days or a few weeks, depending on what we're trying to accomplish with the client.
Sounds great. Thanks for that answer, Myron. So we've got maybe time for one more here. Myron, this one's for you. Myron, it's clear that you added lots of value during your first contract cycle with Red Wing. How do you continue that value in future cycles, and what kinds of things do you do to make sure you are continually adding value?
Yeah, that commonly comes up. The good news is we absolutely find that our clients wish to continue the relationship because it isn't just about adding the immediate value of optimizing things in terms of the economics. It's keeping it that way, right? The absence of professional management ends up begin the day one of cost creep and a lack of optimization. So to answer the question directly, the kinds of things we do in the second contract cycle are many of the same things we do in the first. The change of technology is always happening, so we're always evaluating what needs to be done and how to migrate and change and architect things for both meeting business requirements as well as reducing expenses and servicing the client better. We look at projects that come up and assist with those types of things. And at the end of the day, in the second cycle, we take a look at all the assets, all the work product that's needed, how we've optimized it, maybe made it more efficient, and certainly have pricing changes between the first contract cycle and the second that reflect those either efficiencies or change in scope or growth of the company. So once it's running smoothly, companies very much appreciate that and want to see it continued that way. And we work and partner with them to make sure the price points reflect our work product and the value that they get.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today. We will be providing each one of you with a recording of the webinar, as well as available to answer any additional questions afterwards. So that's a wrap. Myron, Joe, do you have any closing comments?
No.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me to participate today. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks for coming in the heat of battle. And thank all of you again for taking time out of your day. Have a great day and a great week and great month ahead. Great